Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caitlin Sweeney, Senior Reentry Probation Officer for Fairfax Probation and co-convener of the Fairfax Reentry Council. Welcome to the fourth installment of this year's May Speaker Series on exploring diversity and inclusion in reentry. Today, our focus will be on individuals with disabilities. Unfortunately, our speakers are not able to be with us live today, but they have recorded their presentation for us to share. At the end of the presentation, there will be a slide with our presenters' contact information should you have any questions. In addition, if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get those answers for you and send them via email. Now it's my privilege to provide the introductions for our presenters today. Sean Zimmerman is a certified vocational evaluator for the Commonwealth of Virginia for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, aka DARS of Virginia. Sean has worked in the field as a certified vocational evaluator for 15 years, starting as a community-based evaluator, then moving into the state agency evaluating individuals with disabilities. In addition to serving on many boards, Sean has also given presentations at state, regional, and national conferences. Robert Dewey is an Employment Services Specialist Senior for DARS of Virginia. So I'm now going to start the presentation. Hopefully this works.
Hi, I'm Sean Zimmerman and I work for DARS. We'll get into what DARS is in just a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. So I am what they call a certified vocational evaluator, which means that I evaluate people with disabilities in relation to employment. We'll get into more specifics as we go along through this presentation, but I definitely want to highlight how incarceration affects people with disabilities, and then how we are here to help as an agency. So here are just some basic statistics that we got from an online article that basically nearly 2 in 5 prisoners have reported a disability, and this was back in 2016. I had struggled to find newer data, but I thought it was important to note that a large percentage of people do report having a disability. The most common reported disability were cognitive disabilities. And so that's anything that impacts reading, writing, understanding, interacting, things like that. So it could be an intellectual disability, it could be autism, it could be a whole variety of disabilities that are listed under cognitive disability. And then the next one was ambulatory disabilities, people in wheelchairs or need walkers, things like that. And then of course, people with vision disabilities. And that doesn't necessarily mean blind. It could also be visual impairments. So at some point, 24% reported that a doctor, a psychologist, or a teacher had told them that they had maybe ADD or ADHD, and then maybe a quarter, again, of prisoners said that they had special education classes. I think, a lot of times we see that people who have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated, there's a stigma against the word disability and don't always truthfully report their disabilities. And so then I think a lot of people are being missed in these numbers, because my guess would be that that 38% of people that reported a disability, that number would be significantly higher, would be my guess, if everybody was truly honest with their particular disabilities. And then it is saying that prisoners were about 2.5 times more likely to report a disability, but I still think there's a large population that we're missing. I know when I've done, some days in the jail, I forget what we called that, but when we came to visit jails as vendors, oftentimes it was very rare that someone would admit to us that they had a disability. They would say, "Oh, I don't have a disability. I guess I can't work with you." And we would often, express to them, well, it's not just, somebody with an intellectual disability or physical disability, that it could be ADD, ADHD, anything that impacts your ability to become employed. And like I said, we'll get into more of our services in a minute, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw the numbers with how they are with offenders and with disabilities. Excuse me. So a lot of times it's easier to understand statistics too when it's in a graph form. So I thought this was a good representation of that. Pretty much everything that we just saw on the previous slide. And again, this was from 2016. So I'd be interested to see how the numbers are now. So there was an autism or an article from a young man who was incarcerated. He was charged with sexually assaulting his girlfriend. And there were a number of issues that he faced while in jail. And it was a really good, the sort of eye-opening article about his experience living with autism. And thankfully, he did have his mother as an advocate for him, but we have to wonder how many people don't have that advocacy and how important it would be. So if we just look at autism, stuff like loud noises, unpredictable noises, bright lights, unpleasant odors, all the social dynamics going on in jails, the bureaucracy with the prisons or jails, that it's a lot more difficult for somebody on the spectrum to have to navigate that. It's just, they would need a lot more support and understanding from everybody that's working in the jail. So the American with Disabilities Act was signed into law about roughly 32 years ago. That does mandate that people with physical and developmental disorders receive equal access to programs and services provided by public institutions, including correctional facilities. Excuse me. So I think what they found out was that it wasn't always true that prisons and jails were fulfilling those promises, and without the proper advocacies, a lot of people were really struggling. And of course, they would have to self-identify, because if they weren't identified or there weren't any, sort of records available, then obviously it would be harder for them to receive services or even know that they're entitled to receive those services. And it could be simple as just having somebody help them understand the prison rules, get medications, things like that, because obviously it would leave them vulnerable. Maybe they would have a medical misdiagnoses. They might be isolated or end up in solitary confinement, which I believe with this young man, he was supposed to be eligible for early release, but he did not know that he was supposed to get a job in jail. And because he didn't get said job, his early release was revoked, and his mom, had to be a strong advocate for him with legislators and, so on and so forth to get them to reinstate that for him. He just, didn't have any idea. He even requested to be in solitary confinement because all the social dynamics and the loud noises and, everything going on was just overloading his sensory system. And, he just really struggled. And, of course, just the social aspects, just not understanding, how to interact. And then in addition to all the sensory problems. So, it's really important that this issue continues to be brought to the forefront and discussed ad nauseum, really, to make sure that prisoners or people that are incarcerated receive the necessary and proper services that they are entitled to and deserve to have. So that brings us to who we are. So we are an agency, a state agency that works with people with disabilities in relation to employment. So our mission is to improve the employment, quality of life, security, and independence of older Virginians and Virginians with disabilities and their families. The reason why you see older Virginians mentioned is because we are under the larger umbrella for Department of Aging. So we are a division called Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So our job as a piece of the big puzzle is that we simply help Virginians who have benefited from taxpayers' money to become tax-paying citizens themselves. So we are a federal and state program that offers vocational rehab services for individuals with disabilities to help them prepare for, enter, and maintain employment. So what about our services? So like I said, we're helping people with disabilities prepare for. So when they first come to our agency, they're going to meet with a rehabilitation counselor and they'll receive an intake. And then from there, the counselor will determine eligibility. So they have to have a disability, a documented disability that impairs or impacts their ability to become successfully employed. So if you look at somebody on the autism spectrum, there might be a variety of services that that person may require to become successfully employed. And successful employment, we also look for longevity. We're not talking about somebody who just gets a job and we say, okay, great, you got a job. No, they really need to be employed for a long period of time. And we hope that we've given them enough resources that they would not need to come back to us in the future. So of course, if somebody doesn't have a documented disability, they don't have the doctors or the psychiatrists or any of those kind of forms that say they have a disability, we are able to, have them evaluated and try to get something more specific to determine them eligible for services. But this is not a quick fix. We're not a staffing agency. We're really here to help the person become independent and be able to find employment and maintain employment over the long term. So we do work with the person, or in here it says jointly planned with you and your support system. So that's the person with the disability, their support system, and service providers to help them achieve their life and career goals. So that may mean we're assessing their skills, we're discovering their interests, we're helping them figure out career options that are obtainable for them. But we are 100% all about employment. So we do have people that come to us and ask about housing and food and all those types of things. And we can certainly point them in the right direction, but we are solely focused on employment. So if someone's not ready for employment, then they're not ready for us at this time. And, sometimes because our services aren't quick, it could take a year, it could take more, 2-3 years, sometimes 5. But, we'll certainly do our best. So if someone knows they're really not ready for employment right now, then they can certainly apply to us when they are more ready, and we will go ahead and start working with them on building those necessary skills for employment. We will help them develop a career plan and all the steps it would take to get there, and we build in the resources and the supports necessary for that. We can help them gain work experience. They would learn self-advocacy skills. They may explore training options, and we'll get into more of that in a couple of slides. And then, of course, we're helping them become employed and gaining independence. What's important to note about our services is it's 100% voluntary, but we do require that people, really, they have to be active participants. We're not going to work any harder than they are towards their goals. So if someone's just not coming to appointments and just not showing motivation, not following through, then, at some point we'll have a conversation about whether or not this is something they want to do at this time. And if not, then maybe we need to close their case, and they can always reapply when they're ready. So here's some examples of some services that we offer. So I would say that guidance and counseling is something that we offer all the time. This is something we're doing on and off throughout their entire life of their case. So we really help them, we call students or consumers, and we do work with students as well, but we help them identify barriers to employment, and then making decisions concerning their job goals. So making sure that they're making good choices. For example, if someone has an intellectual disability and they really want to be a nurse, but they don't have the academic capability to be successful in that realm, we would spend a lot of time talking to them about what it takes to go in that field, what the requirements are, and then maybe try to figure out what they really like about that field and see if there's something more to entry level that we could focus on, because obviously we would not pay for college or training if they wouldn't be successful. But we definitely want to look at what are their interests and how can we do something related. Career exploration, so this is done in a variety of different ways, but the counselors and even myself as a vocational evaluator, we spend a lot of time doing interest inventories and having a lot of discussions, whether they've worked before, they haven't worked before, what do they do for fun, what do they find interesting, when, what's their dream job, do they want to go to school, do they want to go to learn a trade, do they want to just get any old job? We kind of go through all of that to really narrow things down to come up with an appropriate vocational goal. Vocational evaluation testing, so that is what I do. So I do a lot of paper and pencil assessments. We have work samples so we can see some hands-on work-related skills. We have computer assessments, so we can assess their capabilities to be successful within like an admin position. So I really look at interests, abilities, aptitudes, transferable skills if they've worked before, but maybe they can't return to that same job. I'll look at what they have done and see what we can do to get them back into the same field, but maybe not the same job. We also have a job placement person, and we have employment specialists to help with job seeking skills. So things like resume development, application guidance, and we have people that'll sit down and help them fill out job applications, help them figure out how to answer that question of if you've ever been incarcerated or do you have a criminal background, things like that. We have a lot of conversations about those types of things. We even will sit down and go through to figure out, how do you look for jobs? What do certain aspects of the requirements of the jobs mean? They do a lot of interviewing, practicing, where our job placement counselor, the ESSS, or the employment specialist, they'll get together and sit down with somebody and ask the most common interview questions and really help them prepare for their interviews. And then we have what's called a job club, where they're going to learn all different aspects, from how do you dress appropriately on the job, making sure you shower, all the way to how do you, talk about your incarceration with somebody, with the new possible employer, and how do we work through these challenging things, being an advocate if they need accommodations, things like that. So we cover all that under the job seeking skills. We do have what's called supportive employment, which is where the rehab counselor would refer the person to one of our vendors. And so supportive employment is basically that a person would work with a job coach, And a lot of people associate job coaching with people who just need help learning jobs. And that is one aspect for sure. But there are times where people have, average or above average intelligence, but really struggle, like if you think of somebody on the autism spectrum, they may struggle with those social interactions and, um, those things that they just really can't understand, or they wouldn't understand, like a body language and things like that are more subtle. The job coach could help them navigate through that and be an advocate for that person with their manager. It also could be if someone has severe anxiety, a job coach may be a great idea just to have available in case they need anything. And the job coach can build natural supports on the job so that once they do fade, they have someone at work that they can go to and talk to, because it might not be the manager, it might be somebody else on the job. So really supportive employment is a great service, especially when people just need a little bit more support than some other people who don't need any support. We do, there are a couple of different things that go with vocational training. So we have a sister agency called the Wilson Workforce Rehabilitation Center, and they are in Fishersville, Virginia. They have a really in-depth hands-on career exploration. For example, if someone wanted to be evaluated in the area of automotive, they have a VW Bug with an engine that they have to take apart and put back together again. So they have a lot of different things, but they also offer training for people that need more support. But we also have, local trainings. It could be NOVA, it could be a trade school, it might be another agency that we work with that is more supportive in nature in terms of training. And these are things that we might be able to pay for. I never say we will pay for, because there's a whole lot of factors that go into that. But that might be possible that we would pay for some kind of training. And then we also have a rehab engineering and assistive technology team. So in our area, we have a team of 3 people. So one person is a AT or assistive technology specialist, but she's also an OT or an occupational therapist, who really evaluates the person as a whole and both her strengths, and then coming up with some accommodations that the person might benefit from. She also helps things with executive functioning, like setting up schedules, making sure people take their meds on time, making sure that they go to bed at a reasonable hour, and, just kind of getting in the routine so that when they are ready to go to school or work, they have all the necessary skills they can to stay organized and on task and taking their meds and, so on and so forth. We also have another person who really specializes in AT. So her focus is a lot more on the actual technologies that people might benefit from, whether it's an iPad or a different keyboard or a different mouse or, a whole variety of things. And then we also have a gentleman who does fabricating. So once the person's on the job, and if they might need something to help them to make it easier for them at work, then he could come and maybe build something for them. He has done a lot of really neat things to help people maximize their capabilities, maybe speed up on some things. And he's just a whiz at building, and it could even be modifying homes. Sometimes people live in a situation where maybe they weren't in a wheelchair, but now they are, and they might need a ramp to be built. But remember, all these things have to be work relevant. So we wouldn't do any of this if it wasn't going to help somebody with employment. So for example, with the house modification, that would be because they can't currently get out of their house to be able to go to work. So then we could justify putting in a ramp on their house, because that would make it so they could go to work. So Remember, everything has to come back down to work, but there are just a whole variety of things that we could do to help people be truly successful. And it probably won't just impact work. It probably will impact their entire life. So cost of our services. So there's no fee for people to apply, or if we need to gather more information and we need doctor's records or psychiatrist records, anything like that, we would pay those fees to get access to that information to help determine them eligible for services. A lot of our services are no cost to the consumer. You know, I was talking about like the vocational evaluations I do, that's free to them. The assistance with the interviewing skills and filling out applications and all those types of things, that's of no cost. The supportive employment stuff may have an associated cost, but we would review the income of the consumer and then determine whether or not they need to pay any or all or none of the cost. So it really depends. So we do have financial eligibility. So, but it's important to note that if someone is receiving Social Security income or Social Security disability income, SSI or SSDI, then they automatically meet our financial criteria, our participation criteria, which means that we would pay for everything. So that is a benefit. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean we'd pay for college. You know, there's a lot that kind of goes into those aspects for, you know, not just college, but any additional training. But in terms of evaluation services or supported employment for somebody that's receiving SSI or SSDI, that would be no cost to them. Okay, so no cost services. I know I covered some of this already, but the consumer would not need to worry about diagnosis, evaluation, assessments, disability awareness counseling, vocational and career path counseling, job seeking, job retention. We do have what we call an employment resource center. It's just a room with a bunch of computers that they can come use at any time to do their job search, send their resume. It needs to all be, you know, back to employment related activities, but we do have those computers and staff available to work with people if they want to come in on their own to search for jobs and apply for jobs and things like that. And if they have a job interview that happens to be virtual, they can always come here and use our computers for that as well. Job placement, of course, we have a job placement counselor here, so that would be a no-cost service to the consumer. And then, you know, just following along assistance. So there are times where people need really long-term supportive employment, and that would be at no cost to them. And so what are the things that we might pay for? We might pay for support employment, which I talked about, apprenticeship programs. So sometimes we're able to pay someone to be in an apprenticeship. So they might not get paid by the employer, but our agency may have something built in where they pay that we would pay the consumer and cover the insurance through that employer. Work adjustment, so that is through, again, the supportive employment vendors. So that would be a more long-term assessment on whether or not they can work, which is work adjustment. We might be able to pay for vocational, technical, college, or certificate programs. Again, there's a whole lot of things that go into determining whether or not we can pay for that, but that is sometimes something that we are able to do. I talked about the Wilson Workforce Center. So if someone's determined not financially eligible for services, there is a very small cost to go to the Wilson Workforce Center. But more often than not, people aren't financially eligible, so then that is covered through us. They do also offer life skills training at WWRC, and that is covered by us. So medical equipment or other goods. So that is stuff like hearing aids, glasses, if someone needs new teeth, which again, there's a whole lot of things that go into that, but there's a variety of things that we could do to help somebody, if they have a wheelchair that they just received as a hand-me-down from a church or something, but it doesn't properly fit them and it's causing sores and so on and so forth. We can have them evaluated and we could possibly pay for that wheelchair, for example, or if somebody needs hearing aids or if they need new glasses, these are those types of durable medical equipment. Of course, I mentioned that we have assistive technology specialists, and one happens to be an OT, so we also pay for that, and any related services. So transportation, which I know is huge, especially lately. So if somebody doesn't have access to, they find a job and it's not on a bus route, or even if it is on a bus route, for the first 3 weeks of employment, we can pay transportation so that the person is able to get to and from the job. There are times or sometimes people need us to pay for transportation to get them here, for example, to get their appointments here, or maybe therapy, or some other things. We are able to approve getting them assistance for that. It's not long term. It would be more short term. So it could be the bus or an Uber or a taxi. And then we also encourage people who are eligible to apply for Metro access and things like that. The rehab technology and accommodations, obviously that's covered by us, especially if someone needed the technology or excuse me, or needed us to modify their workstation or anything like that. That is something that we would cover. Personal assistance services. So sometimes we do pay if someone needs like a personal aid. It's kind of tricky because that goes more into that Medicaid, Medicare type stuff. So I won't talk about that much. I'm not as familiar, but sometimes we do pay part of that cost, especially if someone needs them on the job. If they need community case management services, we might be able to do that. If they really need centers for independent living, we would definitely connect them with them. And if there's a small fee, we might be able to cover that. Other supportive services or therapy, speech, OT, PT. Again, keep in mind that everything has to be vocationally relevant. So if it's required to help them become successful towards employment, then highly likely we'd be able to pay for it. But none of this stuff obviously is cut and dry because with every person, there's something different. So we take everything case by case or individual by individual. But this is just a great example of a lot of things that we could offer. So how does one apply for DARS? So to be eligible for services, they must have a documented physical, mental, emotional, sensory, or learning disability. So basically any disability that impedes their ability to become successfully employed. And then the expectation is that they would receive employment outcome from our services and be successfully employed. So the baseline is they would need to be successfully employed for 90 days before they close their case. Obviously, sometimes it takes longer than that. So we basically like to say, so long as they're stable on their job and everything's going well and they don't need anything, then we would close their case, but it would be no sooner than 90 days. They must be legally eligible to work in the United States. That doesn't mean they have to be a citizen, but they have to be able to legally work, because do remember, we are a state agency and we are funded by both like 50% federal, 50% state money. They have to live, work, or go to school in Virginia. So they can't be in Maryland trying to receive services in Virginia. The good news about our agency is that there is one in every state. So there is a VR, we're just all called different things. So I think Maryland is called DORS, for example, DORS. So there are, because it's a federally mandated program, There are offices in every state. And I think what's really important is the person has to be willing and able to go to work. So we have a lot of people that are being pushed by parents or other community partners to get a job, get a job, get a job. But when they come to us, if they really aren't wanting to get a job, it is really hard to motivate that person. So, at some point, it's going to be likely that we end up closing their case because they're just not willing to go to work for whatever reason. And that's okay, but there are consequences to that. And we're always here should they change their mind and want to reapply for services. They need to bring their Virginia state ID, whether that's just an ID card or a driver's license, a social security card, income verification if they're receiving SSI or SSDI. We do ask for tax returns. And again, this is for the purposes of determining whether or not they're financially eligible for participation, meaning, there are some families that make a lot of money and they're claiming family members on their taxes, and then we might not be able to pay for services. So we do need to see those tax returns before we get into that agreement of paying for things. It would be nice that if they came with records of documenting the disability, but we know that doesn't always happen. And as long as they have names and numbers and email addresses for their therapists or whomever, that we would then reach out to them to get their records. And then, of course, like I mentioned, if they had all the information at the very least, then we would acquire those records. If they have a resume or school transcripts, any of those type of things, just anything, even it doesn't even have to be a fancy resume, even if they had a piece of paper that listed all their jobs. It's really important to us to know when you worked, how long has it been since you worked, how long did you work each job, things like that. And of course, if somebody has legal guardianship over them, it'd be great for us to have that paperwork at the time of intake. The more information that they come prepared with, the better, because then we can move things along a little bit faster. But again, we're not a staffing agency and our services do take time. So we never tell people they can't apply for jobs outside of us. We encourage people to apply and try to obtain employment because we're really here to help them figure out how to become employable over the long term, to be successful for years to come. And even if they should want to switch their job, even after their case is closed, that they have the necessary skills that we've given them to be able to do that on their own. Of course, sometimes things, happen on the job. And even though we've closed their case, they're more than welcome to call us up and we can open them in post-employment, or if they've lost their job, that we help them get, and something happened, they can always reapply for services and we can start again. It's not starting all over from the beginning. We're just kind of pick up where we left off, or for whatever happened at that job, we would start from there and move forward. So we can always, if you just call our office, let me show you the contact really quick before we get into limitations. But if you wanted to contact our local office, we're right off of Fairfax Boulevard, and they can just call that 703-359-1124 and speak to Rebecca, who sets up the intakes with our counselors. It does go by zip code, who the counselor is going to be, but in any case, if you want to learn more about services and whether or not we would be able to help, I suggest you give us a call and we'll do our best. And if we're unable, then we will pass you on to somebody that could probably help you. Some limitations about DARS. So we're not a job placement agency. I know I've said that a couple of times, but I think it's very important for people to understand that we don't just have a bank of jobs. We have people apply to the same jobs that anybody would apply for. You know, we go on Indeed.com, we might see some help wanted signs out in the community, you know, a whole variety of things. So we don't just have jobs. We certainly have relationships with employers that might be more open to working with people with backgrounds, things like that. Or, you know, just in general, working with people with disabilities. So, but that does not guarantee a job either. So we just want to make that very clear that we're more about rehabilitating people to be able to work, really giving them the necessary skills to be successfully employable and to be able to get their own job should they need to in the future. And of course, like I said, you know, we will only give as much as the person gives us. So they have to really be actively engaged in their job search and just their services as a whole. We cannot assist with supported group employment. So for example, if somebody's significantly impaired and would not be able to be competitively employable, then we would refer them to the Community Services Board because they have some things like supported group employment opportunities. But we focus on what's called competitive and integrative employment. So what that means is that people with and without disabilities work hand in hand. So everybody's receiving generally the same pay, required to do the same work, you know, things like that. So just remember competitive integrated employment. So I know there are some employment situations, for example, that only hire people with disabilities. Well, in that case, that's not considered competitive integrated employment because it's just people with disabilities. So we look at companies that have a mix of folks. So just keep that in mind. They do need to maintain regular contact with the DARS counselor in order for the case to remain open. So if anything should happen or the person needs to go back to jail or has court dates or anything like that, need to really communicate with the DARS counselor, because if we have no contact for a certain amount of time and we've made 3 attempts to contact the person, then they automatically close the case. And sometimes if we're under order of selection, that might mean you get put on a waiting list. So the more you can communicate, the better, because there are some situations where we could put the case on hold and not close it, which would be to their benefit. We can't pay for services, which may include education and training, if they don't meet the financial criteria. So we talked about that earlier. If somebody's making over a certain amount of money every year, you know, we would not be able to pay for certain things. If what we provide is not needed for the person to achieve their IPE goal, which is the individual plan for employment goal. So if what you want us to help you with isn't going to help you achieve your vocational goal, then obviously we're not going to support that, because we're, again, all about employment. And if there's enough evidence at the end of the day that you just would not benefit from services, so this a lot of times has to do with significant mental illness, and if like the person just didn't want to take any medications, didn't want to do any therapy, just really didn't follow through on things, and you know, maybe would get jobs and get fired and not, you know, slow down and let us, you know, step in and assist, or just not following our recommendations, then at some point, you know, we would have to say, I don't think you're benefiting from our services at this time. We'll close your case, but please feel free to reapply when things are better. So there's a whole variety of things, you know, like I've said, there's a lot of different nuances that go into this, but we do our best to certainly help Virginians and people with disabilities get back into the workforce and be successful. And we definitely want to work with a lot of our community partners and make sure that we're sharing resources and really helping each other out. I apologize for not being live today. We had something that came up, our state agency mandatory meeting. So, you know, we sincerely apologize that we could not be live, but here's my email address. If you should have any other questions, perhaps we can set up a time to chat. Otherwise, like I said, you can contact our office to ask more questions from Rebecca, who's usually at the front, or anybody that answers the phone, really. Otherwise, if you want to look for assistance for anybody else in the state, we have a whole lot of other offices available, and you can just go to vadars.org/offices and find an office in your area. But again, if you have questions, just let me know. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you.
So first, let me just say thank you to Sean and Bob for filming this presentation for us at the last minute. So we definitely appreciate that. Again, Sean's contact information is on the screen. If you have any specific questions or if you'd like to share them in the chat, we can definitely pass those along to Sean and Bob and get those answers to you via email. So I want to thank all of you for being here, as well as attending our events thus far this month. Next week on Tuesday at noon, we will have sort of an open dialogue from 12 to 1, where you're welcome to join us on Zoom and talk about things that you may have learned this month during the speaker series. Offer any questions that you may have, as well as just have the space and time to have some open dialogue about what we've talked about this month. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.